Hey everybody, this is Pastor Kevin from Calvary Chapel, Yuba City, and I'm in our radio station studio here today with a special musical guest, or not a special musical guest, a special guest far beyond just musical ability. And we've got a good friend of ours, Andrea. How do you pronounce your last name?
Kölsch.
Exactly. Yes. Every time I try to say your name, I mess it up. But I do.
Right.
But I remember you telling me how to pronounce it.
Yes.
You kind of put your lips in the oo sound, but you say
the O sound.
Oh, the O.
You form your lips to say O, but you're actually saying E.
No wonder I mess it up, because that's like trying to sound like a pig, but when you're making a cow sound. I'm totally doing the wrong vowel and everything. But this is super exciting to have Andrea with us, because Andrea is really a very gifted worship leader. But beyond that, I mean, she's just an amazing servant of the Lord. And my family's had the opportunity to know her now for several years, 10 years?
At least
more?
10 years.
Yeah.
I think more, actually, but at least, yeah.
And it's cool. I mean, here we sit in California.
Yes.
Yuba City, California, of all
Yes.
places. But Andrea's from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I were ministering in Dublin, Ireland, and yet where we met was Majorca, Spain. So
Yes.
it's like try to connect the dots on that.
Crazy and wonderful.
And even more bizarre than that, Keith and Rachel Todd, our children's ministry and youth ministry directors here, they were students in Majorca, Spain.
Yes.
At the same time that Amanda and I were there, and you were there, and so you know them too.
Yes, I do. That's amazing.
It is.
How that works.
And then also Angelina being here.
I know. So Angelina and we go back like almost 30 years.
Wow.
And to meet up again here, like you're saying, out of all places, Yuba City, it's so cool. That's very cool.
Well, Andrea, Andrea is doing ministry in Santa Barbara, Calvary Chapel, Santa Barbara. How long ago did you come to Santa Barbara?
Almost 6 years ago, I moved from Germany.
And are you the main worship leader there?
I'm one of the worship leaders there. We have a worship pastor. His name is Joseph Pfeiffer, and I am kind of like his assistant and one of the worship leaders. And I fill in when he's gone, and I do all kinds of stuff, actually, not just leading worship, but it's the main ministry that I'm doing down there.
Well, okay, before I kind of preempted myself, before we go down that road, tell us, I mean, obviously I sit here, I know you, but people listening or watching are not going to know you.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about you.
Yes.
Where are you from? What part of Germany? How did you first get involved in ministry, worship ministry, all that kind of stuff? Your testimony, I guess.
So I'm from Germany. I'm from a region between Frankfurt and Cologne. A lot of people know Frankfurt because of the airport, and so I grew up.
And they know Cologne because it smells good.
Not the city, but Cologne does, yes. So I did not grow up in a Christian home, but I was introduced to Christ through a friend who gave me a book, the biography of Johnny Erickson Tada.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Who has an amazing story, an amazing testimony, and an amazing ministry today. And I remember reading that book when I was like 15 years old. And I knew God must be real. So I kind of found myself on this journey to look for God. And when I was 17, I was in the school where my church in Siegen, Calvary Chapel, Siegen, did an outreach to. And they were preaching the gospel, sharing Christ. And I knew that's what I'm looking for.
Wow.
So I came to Christ in 89, so now you can do the math, how old I am now. Gave my life. That's where I met Angelina, because she was part of that outreach group. And started going to Bible studies, started going to church, and started leading worship a couple of years after becoming a Christian. I had always been a music lover, always loved music, had been playing guitar since I was 13, always, have been writing songs, which is kind of my ministry. I love writing. And when I started leading worship, I kind of understood why God created music. And it's like, this is it. This is why we have music, to glorify God, and it connects us to heaven. And so from that point on, I started writing worship songs.
Who do you find to be, if there are any, who do you find to be, I guess we could say, influential, worship leaders to you as a worship leader? Is there anyone in particular or groups in particular that you just, when you listen to their stuff, it ministers to you? It because what's weird about, because I've been leading worship for 20 years or so as well, on and off. Certainly not to the degree that you do, but it's interesting when you are leading worship. You're using this gift, this ability that God's given you, and yet at the same time, God uses it to draw people closer to Himself. And so it's kind of this marriage of the human and the divine.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, are there any people or worship leaders or groups that minister to you, whose music really minister to you?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, because I believe when I first came to Christ, music actually ministered more to me than the Bible. It was just more, it just got to me quicker. So back then, and of course it changes, like who's your musical influence, it changes over the years. But when I first became a believer, people like Julie Miller, I don't even know if people still know who she is.
Yep, I know who she is.
Stephen Curtis Chapman, they influenced me big time. And then I think, when in the 80s or 90s, worship wasn't that big of a music branch, or whatever you call it, genre. It kind of started in the 90s, late 90s, and I remember listening to Delirious coming out. A lot of what came out of what was going on in England, Matt Redman, big time, Delirious, just the way they wrote music, the style. I definitely would say Delirious was like one of my biggest influences.
Wow, that's
still
cool.
To this day. Matt Redman, of course. And then, over the years, Chris Tomlin, of course. I mean, who can go without him, And then there's so many, just over the years, so many worship artists who've come and go. Vineyard, of course, so much music coming out of that church. Today we look to Bethel music, and there's so much coming out of there. Kim Walker and Josh Baldwin and Jeremy Riddle. So there's many. I cannot put my finger on one or two, but definitely I would say the biggest influences have been like Delirious and whatever came out of Britain, Matt Redman, Tim Hughes, those kind of guys.
I'll do a shameless plug here for a guy that both you and I know, Brett Williams. Did you ever listen to Brett Williams stuff?
Of course, yes. Oceans, love this album.
Yeah, I mean he dude, I love his stuff.
Yes.
And what was really cool in my experience was I, like you, kind of was writing music, but then the Lord got a hold of my life, started writing Christian music, and it was hard to find Christian music that I liked.
Yeah.
Because I found a lot of it, the production value was back. Absolutely. This was back in the 90s. And I found this guy named Brett Williams, and I thought, oh, this guy's music is so great. And then years later, I got an invitation to a worship leaders conference, and it was signed Brett Williams, and I was like, is Brett Williams a worship leader? And sure enough, he was. It was really interesting.
And now he's a pastor.
Yeah. I know.
No, I know Brett.
Shout out to Brett Williams.
Yes.
Calvary Chapel, Whidbey Island.
Absolutely. And Tim Meany as well, right? Yeah. Great guys. I mean, those are the guys that kind of modeled worship for me.
Yeah.
Because they would actually come over to Germany to do outreach in Germany for the church. Brett would come. Tim Meany still is coming over. I think he was just there like a couple of months ago.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So they modeled worship. You just kind of got to see it live and in color, how they do worship.
And so, you know, that's you kind of have this track record of going to churches with a lot of celebrities, because now the church you go to, Kevin Costner attends. Is that correct?
know.
I just found this out
He
last
does.
night. Yeah.
He actually does. Yep. They're
Unless you have a
second row,
cardboard
he's right
cutout
there.
of him in your lobby and people just take their picture with him.
No, he's real.
That's funny.
He's coming. Yes, it's kind of cool. I mean, Santa Barbara is just like the hub of, you know, where celebrities live, I guess, you know, fleeing the Hollywood busyness.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking a little bit now about you know, first getting involved in ministry, starting to lead worship, and kind of that transition away from having done music, but now doing music, we might say, for the Lord. Let's talk a little bit about one of your earlier worship songs that you wrote, "Rain Down," which
Yes.
you've kind of said is almost like, I don't know, a signature song almost of yours.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the song? We're going to listen to it in just a moment.
Yes. So when I started writing worship songs, Rain Down was actually one of the first songs I wrote. And I wrote it within, like, I want to say 15 minutes, the whole thing. And God doesn't always do that for you, but sometimes he does. And it just came out of, I struggled as a young believer. I struggled with, because I was the only one in my family. They didn't understand this whole Jesus thing. I struggled with my friends at school. They didn't know what was going on. And so I just felt like a little alone in this journey. So that's how I approached writing Rain Down, just coming out of this, you know, I need your living water to fill me and just to empower me.
Okay, so we're going to listen to Rain Down. This is off of, what's the name of the CD? The King I Love?
The King I Love, yeah.
Okay, so this is Andrea.
Kölsch.
Exactly, there we go. This is Rain Down off her CD, The King I Love.
Let your glory fall.
wash over me. And rain down, living water, rain down, living water, rain down, wash over me. Come rain down, living water, rain down on me. Oh, living water, rain down all over me.
Okay, so that was Rain Down from our in-studio guest, Andrea.
Kölsch.
Off.
You should get it by now.
I should.
Try.
I know. I'm just going to murder it. Kölsch.
There you go.
Kölsch. This there's a commercial on TV. I was kind of poking fun at Andrea last night because there's this commercial on TV that's very popular right now. I don't have to mention what the product is, but it's the person in the commercial is German, and it's a lady, and she says, "Of course it's cold. It's German." And it's just every time I see it, I think of Andrea, because we've spent a decent amount of time in Germany. You're obviously German, and my family, Americans love to talk about where their family came from,
Right.
but my mother's whole side of the family came from Germany, and there's kind of definitely that just business-like nature of this is the way it is, and
Yeah.
so it's just interesting.
Yeah, I can't deny it. It's on me.
So this song "Rain Down" that we just listened to from Andrea's CD, "The King I Love." Quickly, before we go any further, tell us how we can get in touch with you if people want to order your CDs or even have you come and share at their church.
Yes. So first of all, you can of course get the CDs on iTunes.
Right.
You can also listen to the songs on Spotify just for free. If you want to get into contact with me, you can use the church's website, which is calvarysb.com. I'm on there, or you can email me directly over info@andreakölsch.com, which is also my website, www.andreakölsch.com.
We've kind of already talked up to this point, but we're going to continue to talk here a little bit about the evolution in Andrea's ministry. When you first started leading worship, it was connected to Calvary Chapel Siegen,
Right.
in Siegen, Germany.
Yes.
At what point did you feel like the Lord was calling you or leading you to branch out a little bit, to not just leading worship in the context of a local fellowship,
Yes.
but to be available to travel around and minister through your music?
Yes. So it's a total God thing. I worked with a newspaper in Siegen. I was a software writer for the newspaper, which took up a lot of my time. Programmers are really what you think they are. They work 24/7, at least in their brains. They work Monday through Saturday, sometimes Sundays. And I would lead worship every Sunday. And I would love leading worship. I still do, of course. And I always felt like I want to do more ministry. So how does that go hand in hand with having a job like a software writer? So it got to the point where I just couldn't do both. And I really felt the Lord leading me into full-time ministry. This is kind of, in a nutshell, there's like a bigger story behind how God did it. But God led me to actually quit my job.
Okay.
And it wasn't a decision I made lightly. There was a lot of prayer that went with that. But I gave up my job, kind of due to a burnout I experienced. And I was thinking about, well, maybe I should find a part-time job. Maybe I should just stack up, shelves in a grocery store or whatever, just something easy. In prayer, God just kind of almost challenged me and said, why don't you try doing this full time?
Wow.
And I was not on staff. I wasn't hired by any church to do this. I got a lot of support from my local church back then and from friends around me. But I basically went out on my own as a musicianary, how my pastor Nick Long would call it. He came up with that term. So I would travel as a missionary throughout Europe. I came to Dublin, Ireland, went to London, Spain, France, Holland, everywhere. And I would lead worship, I would do worship workshops, I would train up worship teams, do conferences, all that kind of stuff. And God really blessed that ministry. So after my job as a software writer, I did that for like 6-7 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when was the start of that transition roundabout year-wise?
Oh, gosh, year-wise, I don't even know.
Because I guess we knew you sort of when you were in the midst of that
I was already
transition.
Was I still working back then?
I think
in a normal job?
I think you were. I want to say you were, but maybe not.
So
maybe
I want to say
2006,
2007, 2006.
See, I think the
like
first retreat where we met you was 2007.
Yeah.
So either
maybe
you had
that was
just
like,
done it or
yes.
were in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Were there any people that you look back on who were really instrumental kind of in that process of coming to you either with encouragement or, hey, I was thinking about you and the Lord gave me this verse to kind of help solidify in your thinking that this is what the Lord was, or was it all purely just from prayer and reading the Word?
You know what? It actually was mainly just the Lord.
Cool.
I can't think of anybody who kind of tried to push me in that way. I got a lot of encouragement after I made the decision.
Right.
A lot of pastors and leaders got behind me. But it was all God's doing. I remember I quit my job and I took a little break. I went to Holland. Just to kind of hear from the Lord, to fast, to pray.
Can you hear from the Lord in Holland? I'm just kidding. Sorry, that's wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Sorry,
yes.
Forgive me.
And I remember I was super sick. It was terrible weather. It was raining. And my last day there, I was on the beach and I told the Lord, I'm not leaving unless you speak to me. And that's when God just put that on my heart. It's like, just go for it. Try me.
Wow.
Just see if I cannot support you. So I drove home knowing that, okay, I'm not going to look for any other job. I'm just going to dive in. And the funny thing is, on my way home, I was in the car. I got a phone call from a friend of mine who I went to the same home group with. I had missed home group that week because I was in Holland. They were having home group in Siegen, Germany. And she said, I had a picture for you. We were praying for you because we know you were out there seeking the Lord. I had a picture of you, and there's a fairy tale in Germany. It's this little girl who is...
I thought you were going to say Hansel and Gretel for a minute.
No, almost. But it's this little girl, super poor, who has nothing. Her parents pass away. It's kind of sad. German fairy tales are always very kind of sad and kind of heavy. And she has nothing but her undergarment. And what she does is in the middle of the night, she just kind of also, long story short, she holds up her undergarment and from the sky fall these golden stars into her undergarment to kind of provide for her. And my friend called me and she shared that story. She said, I had a picture of that fairy tale when I was praying for you. And I knew God was going to provide for me. Maybe not through stars in my undergarment.
It's an interesting fairy tale, I have to say. I need to get a hold of this and read it to my children.
It's called Sterntaler.
Is this like, sounds like the origins of Captain Underpants, I'm thinking.
Yes, a bit more romantic.
Yeah, probably. Fairy tales are kind of dark. I mean, you look at a lot of the fairy tales, and it's always, most of them are always like this poor girl whose parents die.
Yes.
It's like so many of them start that way.
Right.
Like even
But they
modern
always have a
ones.
good ending.
They do. That's true. And yours does too. So tell us a little bit
Yes.
more about, well, God provided. And
God
obviously,
provided.
you were able to go do that ministry. We're going to talk a little bit about how you came to be in Santa Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do, you mentioned like when you were going around and ministering at churches, like one of the things you would do would be worship workshops.
Right.
Are there any things that you kind of look at where the church is and kind of with the culture, so to speak, that exists within worship, within churches, that you find to be particularly challenging or misconceptions maybe that worship leaders may develop when they're wanting or when they're approaching the ministry of leading worship? I mean, I know for me, the fine line was always, trying, to make sure I could delineate between performing versus leading worship. And it got to the point when I began to sense or feel, maybe this was just me personally, that there was a lot of performance-driven,
Yes.
quote-unquote, worship. I don't know. What about you? Any
Yeah, I think what
observations?
what happened is that people start to worship. They start to worship the music. They want to hear their favorite songs. They want to hear a big band. They want to hear good quality music, and there's nothing wrong with all of that. We want to play good songs. We want to play with a full band. We want to do a good job. There's also, I think there is an element of performance in what we're doing that is legit,
Yeah.
because we are in front of people. We are on a stage. I hate to call it a stage. I prefer to call it a platform, but we are in front of people, so they are automatically looking to us. So there is a performance aspect to it. The thing is, what do I do with that?
Right.
The attention I have on stage, what do I do? Do I use it to merely deliver a good performance and people are stoked by the music? Or do I want them to be stoked on God?
Yeah.
And that's where, as a worship leader, I have to make sure the music doesn't get in the way. And that goes both ways. Like, it can be, I don't even know if it can be too professional. I actually think if we do our best when it comes to the quality of music, it's helpful. The more helpful it will be. If I do a crummy job,
Yeah.
it will be distracting.
Yeah.
If you have a singer who sings out of tune, it's distracting. If you have a drummer who's out of timing, it's distracting people from actually getting to where we want them to go, which is the presence of God.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually important to have good quality in the music aspect of worship, but also the heart.
Yeah.
That's another, probably, the bigger aspect of worship, and we need to take care of that too. And sometimes I feel like we focus so much on the music that the heart just kind of has to be dragged along. And I always see my job as a worship leader to get people's attention. Yes, we want to do good music, but then we need to step out of the way. I just need to make sure people are looking to God and not to the band. And there's, it's a fine line how we do that, because we want to do well as musicians, but we also want to do well with not being in the way.
Yeah, and it is a fine line.
Yeah.
I think that even for me teaching, I walk a fine line of, wanting to just teach the Bible versus wanting to deliver a powerful speech.
Yes.
And I think, I think what we're talking about, it kind of even speaks to a larger phenomenon within the church today, and I think this has always been there. Of kind of the consumer mentality. I go to church to get something.
Right.
And
Yes.
I don't really go to listen to Bible studies. I'm there to evaluate whether or not the pastor did a good job.
Absolutely.
Because people have a tendency to run Bible studies through the filter of, I either agree with that or I don't know if I agree with that. And so the interesting thing that happens then in that case is the person listening is no longer a disciple. They're actually sitting in judgment over whether they agree with what's being taught. So now they're the evaluator. And I think with worship as well, people can equate, everybody clapping, getting the hair on the back of their neck standing up and talking about their worship experience. Did you feel that? And I've always thought, well, if I go to a U2 concert and people are clapping and singing and raising their hands and I feel a certain way, and that's how I measure worship in my church, what's the difference?
Right.
Instead of, can I worship even when all that stuff's stripped away, which, is the heart behind Matt Redman's song,
Yes.
The Heart of Worship,
Absolutely.
when the music fades and all is stripped away.
Absolutely.
So this is Andrea.
Kölsch.
There she is, talking about worship music ministry. Let's talk a little bit about your transition to Calvary Chapel, Santa Barbara. How long ago did that happen? How did that happen? And then we're going to get to some more of your music.
Yes. So I moved almost 6 years ago. It's really interesting because up to that point, before I came over to Santa Barbara, I had been traveling a lot throughout Europe. And it's so funny because I had many opportunities to leave Germany and be in places like Dublin or Mallorca or many opportunities. And it never felt the right thing to do. I always felt super connected to my church in Siegen. Saw my ministry there as well, next to being a traveling musician, but also wanting to be part of what was going on at the church there. And it was at a conference that Calvary Chapel Siegen puts on every year. I led worship for that conference. After I led worship, I sit down next to David Guzik, who is pastor of Calvary Chapel Santa Barbara. Sit down next to him to listen to the message of whoever, I can't remember who was speaking after I led worship. And I sat down next to him, and he was just about to transition to Santa Barbara. Him and his wife had started a Bible college in Siegen, Germany. And they were there for I want to say 7 years.
Something like that.
Yeah. And they were leaving that same year. We had this conference. And he was leaning over to me to take over the church in Santa Barbara. And he was leaning over to me saying, if you ever want to come to Santa Barbara, the door is wide open.
Wow.
And I was thinking in terms of vacation. Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, I'll think about that.
Which would have been
Thank you.
good enough, yeah.
Right. And he goes, no, to stay and serve with the church. And I'm like, wow, I didn't see that coming. And right after that conference, I went to England to do some ministry in London. And I was praying over Santa Barbara, and you just know when it's God. And I had a friend with me traveling. Especially
on a cold, wet England day, you just know you're called to Santa Barbara. Sorry, kidding.
That's right. So yeah, we talked about it. She felt like she was encouraging me. She goes this is the Lord, you know it. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I just knew.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Now, in these previous 6 years is when you've written and put together Walk On, right?
No, actually, I did that within the first couple of years I was in Santa Barbara.
Okay, tell us a little bit about this CD. Why is this called Walk On? Was there anything happening in your life that particularly relates to?
Yes. So the funny thing is, I wrote all the songs on there. They all kind of revolve around sticking to it, perseverance, walking with Christ, not giving up. And I wrote most of those songs in that transition time between Germany and Santa Barbara. And it's hard. You move into a total different culture. You don't know anybody. You live with people you've never met. You get a new position. You don't know any staff member, all that. It was just hard. The transition wasn't easy. So a lot of those songs come out of that. Now, a lot of Santa Barbara people will think, what? It was that hard listening to the songs. But, you just kind of, as a songwriter, you just express your what you're going through in songs. So that's when I wrote the songs. What's interesting is, 4 years ago, the album had just come out. It was just about to come out. I experienced my first panic attack. Leading worship on stage. And I've been struggling with anxiety and panic ever since. especially when I'm on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the CD came out and I was supposed to present it to the church. And that was like the first big mountain I had to conquer, because I was just experiencing panic and anxiety.
Wow.
I'm like, I don't even know if I can play this album. I don't even know if I can go on tour with this, because I don't feel able to be on stage. So the funny thing is, those songs that I had written out of a total different reason kind of came back to me, because it talks about being in the desert and drowning at the same time. That's what a panic attack feels like, just dying.
Wow.
It talks about his sovereignty over your life, no matter what. And all those songs, when I sing those songs now, it's like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
They just speak into my own heart, almost in a prophetic way.
Mm-hmm.
And one song, the title song of the CD, Walk On, and that's why I named the CD Walk On, speaks about kind of leaning on Ecclesiastes, where it talks about there's a time for everything. There's a time for speaking, there's a time to be silent, there's a time for war, there's a time for peace. And I tagged onto it, there's never a time to give up.
I like it.
And the whole thing with anxiety and panic attack is it wants to disable you from what you are doing. And I realized that the enemy wanted to disable me from doing my ministry. And I got to the point where I felt like, you know what? I'm not going to give in. And although it feels like I'm going to die on stage, and I haven't died yet, haven't gotten a heart attack yet, but it always feels like that. And I don't care. I'm going to walk on because there's no reason, there's no time to give up.
Wow, that's powerful. Which brings up a really good point. Guys, when you're listening to Christian music or worship music, it almost brings in, it's interesting. We'll pray before we read the Bible, but how many people take a CD and before they listen to it, pray and say, God, as I'm listening to this, speak to my heart? Because you're really talking about the ministry potential of this music, and that's something that goes beyond just the entertainment value of Christian music, that there's real ministry that happens through this. So I just want to encourage you guys, as you listen to music, be thinking about it. Almost regard it like the Psalms are. They're poems and songs that were written, but they minister to us.
Yes.
And if you ever do find yourself struggling with anxiety, by all means, feel free to call us here at Calvary Chapel, Yuba City, 530-674-5296. We'd love to pray with you. What we'll do now, let's listen to this song, Walk On, from Andrea off her CD, Walk On, and then we'll come back and wrap things up.
I've been everywhere, all around, here and there, but I haven't found a home, so I guess I'll move on. I can see a light on my way, shining bright on the next part of the road, so I guess I'll walk on. There's a time for laughing and a time to weep. There's a time for war and for peace. There's a time to let go and a time to keep, but there's never a time to give up. Oh. faithful soul meets the great unknown, the promise will unfold. So I guess I'll hold on. Oh, there's a time for laughing and a time to weep. There's a time for war and for peace. There's a time to let go and a time to keep, but there's never a time to give up. There's a time for breaking and a time to heal. There's a time to mourn and to dance. There's a time for silence and a time to speak, but there's never a time to give up. Oh,
Okay, so we're back with Andrea.
Kölsch. I'm
Yes,
sorry, I
and
can't get you. He's
okay.
like pointing his finger at me every
She's
time
just
he
looking at.
says
She's not even looking
Yeah.
at me. She's like ignoring me. That was her song "Walk On" off her CD "Walk On." It's been a real treat having you with us today. Unfortunately,
Thanks for
we're
having me.
just about out of time.
Yeah.
But again, I want to remind everybody how they can get in touch with you for more of your music and your music ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us again how we can reach you.
So you can either email me through info at andreakölsch.com, which is AndreaKoelsch.com. Very weird German name. You can go on my website, andreakölsch.com, or you can visit Calvary Chapel Santa Barbara's website, calvarysb.com, and you can find me on there.
Very, very cool. So really blessed to have Andrea with us today. Again, we're out of time. That's all the time we have for this interview. But be sure to listen to our radio station for more of these interviews of this type. We're going to be making a lot more this year. So God bless. Have a wonderful afternoon, or whenever you're listening to this, evening, morning. Yeah, God bless you guys. And don't forget, reach out to us here at CCYC.com. We would love to hear from you. Stop by and visit sometime. 613 Bogue Road, Yuba City, California, 95991. Take care. God bless.
Lord, your love to me is wonderful, so wonderful. And Lord, your love to me is beautiful, so beautiful. Long before you said, let there be light, before the beginning of all time, you delighted in me, way beyond what I can understand. Oh, my heart can comprehend. Your love has no beginning and no end. Here we go. Lord, your love to me is wonderful, so wonderful. Lord, your love to me is beautiful, so beautiful. Your glory is above the heavens. majestic is your name in all the earth. Yet your eyes are on me, deeper than the depths of my own heart, wider than the distance we're apart. Nothing could ever take away your love. And Lord, your love to me is wonderful, so wonderful. Lord, your love to me is beautiful, so beautiful. Hey, Lord, your love to me is wonderful. It's so wonderful. And Lord, your love to me is beautiful. Oh, so beautiful. Oh, Lord, your love to me is wonderful. It's so wonderful. And Lord, your love to me is beautiful. Oh, so beautiful. Thank you guys. Thank you.